Welcome everyone to Small Biz Matters. We are broadcasting from the fabulous Rara XeroCon, and I'm very pleased to be welcoming Hiroki from GoCardless. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, this is quite a big step into the XeroCon ecosystem and the XeroCon market. The fact that you're here, the fact that you're talking to advisors and bookkeepers really on the ground. Are you pleased to be at XeroCon, firstly?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. We're really excited to be here at XeroCon. They're a really important partner for us and have been in the UK where we started for a long time, but we've entered the Australian market about 6 months ago. And a big part of the reason we've actually entered Australia is because of that Xero partnership and the strength of it. And we're already seeing some really great traction amongst small businesses in Australia. So very excited to be here and meet some customers, meet some prospective customers, meet some of our partners. And yeah, we're very excited.
And it's about, I guess, building relationships and building networks and talking to different people, including media. I guess Xero does provide that platform on which a lot of different businesses can flourish. As you mentioned, it made it easier to come into the marketplace here because of them, but they are worldwide, as you are, global. Yeah. Is it important for an organisation such as yourself to, I guess, get it right in one market before you broad out and sort of stretch your wings and get into different markets and different marketplaces?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of complexity that comes from going international and building new offices and teams around the world, and you don't really want to be getting into that unless you have the core proposition right and you've got enough momentum in your home market that you know what works, you know what doesn't work, and that's not to say that it translates directly into every country that you go into, but it at least provides the kind of the baseline and the foundation. So we started the business just over 8 years ago, and for the first 6 years or so of the business's life, we were fairly focused on the UK, where we were still learning about the various problems that we were solving for our customers, and still learning about all the various types of customers that we could work with. And we work with quite a broad range of customers, so it was important for us to really understand that and get that settled before we started expanding. And so only over the last 2 years that we've been investing much more heavily in international expansion.
I think there's a lot to be learned there from any small businesses that are listening to this Small Biz Matters podcast, because it's not too different to the way small businesses operate, in that we nail it where we are and maybe keep it local to begin with and learn what our customers need, and then you expand. We just might not be doing it on a global level like GoCardless does. So tell me about the journey, aside from the movement into the Australian market. How did GoCardless start? Where was the passion? Where did the seed come from?
Yeah, well, the seed really came from this belief of getting paid was too difficult, and actually when we first started, it was a little bit of a different idea, which was we were fairly recently just finished university. I was 2 years into my first job, and the problem that we felt existed was actually more for informal groups, right? Going on holiday with your friends, captain of your local sports team, student societies, that kind of thing. Yeah. Collecting payments was really awkward and a pain, and we thought, okay, let's try and build something to solve that. And actually, we didn't know anything about payments, right? We didn't know anything about the landscape. And as we started to build that and learn more about how payments worked, we realized that there was a much bigger problem out there, which was that it wasn't just sort of like these informal groups that were struggling to get paid. It's actually businesses in general struggling to get paid. And what we realized was that there was a lot of innovation going on around e-commerce and retail, and helping big businesses to sell transactionally online, and that was all focused on building technology on top of credit and debit cards, right? That was the kind of the way that most of these kind of transactions were happening. And what we believed, and what we continue to believe, is that that's great for e-commerce and retail, but there's a lot of other use cases which are not well served by those kind of technologies and those kind of solutions. And in particular, where we've landed and where we focus now is around recurring payments, where you've got this ongoing relationship with the customer and you're trying to collect payment on an ongoing basis. And that's a very different problem that needs a different solution, and no one was building that. And so that's where we ended up, pivoting a little bit in the early days and creating this platform to really create the best way to collect recurring payments.
And I bet people who are listening out there, small businesses, can think of at least 10 or 12 clients, relationship people that they've got, established relationships with that have got this pinch point. It is a massively common problem.
Oh, absolutely.
And obviously worldwide.
Well, I don't think I've met a small business that hasn't got this problem, right?
Who walks up to you and goes, I don't need any help with payment terms.
No, exactly.
Yeah. I've nailed it.
I never chase my customers for payment. I mean, once they start using GoCardless, then it's a different matter. But it's absolutely a huge problem, and especially for small businesses. We work with about 45,000 businesses across the world now. Many of them small businesses, and the big problem we typically solve there is around those kind of invoice payment collections, where you're sending your customers invoices on a regular basis, and then having to chase them on a regular basis too, and that late payments problem and the impact it has on these businesses' cash flow. Really, it's a really big problem, and we're really happy to be able to help them with that. And
it's also a global problem. I mean, it's also a macroeconomic problem. We were listening to Trent Innes earlier on the screen talking about $22 billion shortfall to small business because of the difference between the payment times that big business experiences and the trickle-down effect that it has on small business.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess this is one of the major macroeconomic pain points that you're solving as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were just talking before we started the recording about the problems around credit, right? And people being able to get access to loans, but our belief is that obviously there's always going to be a place for loans, but oftentimes these loans are being used to bridge that problem, right, around the service you've delivered to your customer, or the product that you've sold to your customer, and then actually receiving the payment for that. And that is something that our view is that you really shouldn't have to be getting a loan to cover that, right? It should be a much more seamless experience to get paid from your customers, and that's what we're trying to help deliver.
And it's that shortfall between you have debts and requirements with the ATO, and let's face it, not all small businesses are great at going, oh, here's my $10,000 invoice that just got paid, I'll just put away $1,000 for GST and I'll put $2,000 away for tax, and I promise not to tax that money no matter what.
Yeah.
But I guess that's not the problem you're solving. It's not necessarily in the understanding what the problems are with cash flow in that regard. It's more about just getting paid faster so you can get that money in the door to put it aside and do all the right things.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the key point, really. It's about trying to minimize the need to go and dip into those pots because you're waiting for payment from your customers, and creating a much more seamless experience where you're able to actually dictate the terms and actually set the timings of those payments in a much more consistent way, and gives a lot more control to the business, right? And it's quite a big mentality shift, and it's one where I think there's a level of education that you need to take your customers through. But what we see time and time again is that when small businesses do adopt this kind of way of collecting payment, then they quickly realize the benefit of it, and many of our customers will end up mandating it, right? They say, okay, well, if you want to do business with me, then this is the way you need to pay me.
Yeah, and putting it into engagement letters and contract terms and all that.
And
sort
actually,
of stuff.
what we find is that a lot of the time, our customers, so the people that are paying these invoices, they actually prefer it as well, because a lot of the time that you have these late payment issues, it's not that someone's trying to deliberately slow down payments. It's just that they don't get around to it, right? We're all busy. We've got lots of things to do, and paying your invoices typically is something that you'll get round to when you've got time.
Yeah.
And we're able to solve that as well. So there's benefits on both sides.
And it's not just about the big business trickle down effect. I guess from one business to another, one small business to another, we're also dealing with the fact that we're not so great, as you mentioned, of paying our own things. But if we all talk about the mandating situation, I mean, one of the platforms Small Biz Matters is trying to push for is mandating payment times. But I suppose as small businesses, we could take responsibility for that and actually start mandating our own payment times for one
absolutely.
another.
I think it's about, taking a bit more control of the situation. And, it's all good saying, okay, well, we're going to mandate certain payment times. But if there's no mechanism for actually making that seamless and, actually ensuring it happens, right, and automating it, then, it's very difficult to make that happen in reality. Right, we all have so much going on in our lives that It's often something that gets left at the bottom of the outbox, or the to-do list.
It's the Sunday night, let me get around to doing all my payments and putting my money around, moving it from one account to the other. Absolutely. I mean, such a typical problem that small businesses have. Let's talk about some of the barriers that a company like GoCardless would face when explaining this product. I mean, obviously, I guess retail and bricks and mortar, they get it because they're used to being paid straight away. Is one of the barriers that you experience that there's actually a bit of a mentality of, well, I just have to deal with the fact that there's 14 days before I get paid and I just have to have like a buffer? Is that one of the issues that you come across, or what are some of the typical barriers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the biggest challenge, especially within this kind of small business community, is around education, right? It's about showing people that there's a different way of doing business and a different way of behaving. And obviously it requires a bit of investment up front to change your process, to figure out how this works, to educate your own customers about how you want to change the way you get paid. And one of the reasons why we've had so much success with Xero is because actually some of the biggest advocates for that education have been accountants, right? Where especially you've got the kind of the new breed of accountants that Xero has championed so effectively around being more of an advisor to the businesses that they serve. That's a really great way of educating the market. And not only do we work with accountants to help them with their own payments, we're able to use that as a demonstration of, okay, well, look, this is what can be done, right? And actually a lot of the new customers that we get on board come through that mechanism of, okay, well, I've just paid my accountant, or I've just paid this other business for a good or a service using GoCardless, and that was really great. That was a great experience. Hang on, maybe this is something that would be useful for my business.
Yeah.
And that happens quite a lot. So, I think the main thing is around awareness and education. And then what we see is that once people start to adopt the service, and, they always go through this kind of life cycle, right? Where they start with a few customers, just test it out, some of the new ones. And then they realize, okay, actually, this is a lot better. And now I'm going to get all of my new customers on board. And then all of a sudden it's, okay, well, if you want to do business with me, then you have to pay this way. And then you kind of slowly but surely get, all of the customers on board. And, when you get to that, then, there's some fantastic stories that we've seen where, business owners that are spending, 1.5 days a week just chasing their customers for payment suddenly get that time back, right? And suddenly they're not losing sleep at night because they don't know whether they're going to be able to make payroll this month because they've improved their cash flow so much. And it gives them the ability to focus on, what they got started in business for in the first place, which is, creating great goods and great services.
It's a bit odd, isn't it, that we have... that there are so many steps. Obviously, you're very familiar with that journey. But it's odd that we've got, step one is... thinking about doing it, recognizing that there's options out there. Step two is, I might implement it for a few customers, and then, hey, look, this is really working for me. I think I'll make it even better. And then it almost, it's like, why are we taking so long? Is it a mental health thing where we don't value our own time and we don't see it as a loss of time with that day and a half a week of payment chasing? Is there a bit of a mental health thing where we don't, think that it's important enough for our business?
No, I kind of have a slightly different view on that. I think that this whole problem around late payments can create a lot of mental health issues, right? The stress that it can cause, the anxiety it can cause, it's a big deal. But I think the reason why people don't realize that this is possible around changing behaviors is just because it's been like this for so long, right? Yeah. It's just, I think it's been something that, for a long time has just been accepted wisdom, I guess. It's like, okay, well, this is just part of doing business.
Yeah.
I have to chase my customers. I have to spend a day a week doing it. And they're going to pay me late, right? And it's almost like that's such an ingrained, dynamic that can very easily be just suddenly the status quo.
Yeah, and like you said, over many years, absolutely.
And that was what we were able to do, was that, part of the technology that we built was really about opening up access to these payment rails. And so very tangibly, the product that we offer is the ability to collect payment via direct debit in a really seamless and easy way. And part of that is around opening up access, right? A lot of small businesses have not been able to get access to direct debit in the first place, right? Because they'd go to their bank and their bank would give them this sort of long list of requirements that they weren't able to necessarily meet. And we were able to open that up and democratize access to it. And that has enabled this new way of collecting payment, which wasn't possible before.
Well, let's talk about that journey, because obviously this is not a product, I don't think, in the Australian landscape at least, that could have existed 10 years ago because of all the regulation and the hanging on. Are you finding that it's opening up more because of products like Xero and because of more and more abilities? I think the banks have got to catch up, haven't they? It's like, okay, the payment terms, the PayPals and the Stripes of the world are coming to get them. They need to start opening their doors so that people can do the direct debit thing more easily. Has that been something that's happened in just the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a confluence of a few things, right, where this kind of a product and service has been possible to create in the last 5-10 years, and it wasn't, 10, 20 years ago. And so part of it's regulation. The regulators around the world, I think, have woken up to the need to open up access to financial services to a much wider variety of organizations and small businesses in particular. And, we're seeing that not just with payments, but, with lending. I know that there was the Royal Commission that happened recently in Australia. That's something that's happening all around the world, right? And I think that regulators are waking up to the need to push to open up access. And very tangibly, when we started in Europe 8 years ago, it was off the back of some regulatory change that we were able to get access to these systems in the first place, right?
Oh, right, yeah.
It wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago or 12 years ago. It was only really when that regulation had kicked in. And in that sense, we were lucky, right? We hadn't planned that. We didn't really know. It was sort of just good timing, I guess. I think the other big thing has been around the development of technology and the ability to kind of create these services in the cloud that would have been very costly to build in the days before that.
Trying to build it into a different, 15 different types of desktop software. Exactly. How do you even begin to do that?
Yeah, and so the ability to offer this kind of a service in the cloud in a way that's very seamless and very low cost to get started, that's been very important. But I think the third thing that's been really a culture change that I've seen, at least over the last 5 to 10 years, is that I think as consumers and as businesses, there's been this I guess sort of opening up of being willing to try these kind of financial services from new providers, right? So if you think about how most financial services were provided and consumed in the past, it was, okay, I go to my local bank and, I go into the branch and I talk to my bank manager and
you get those little canvas bags that you carry your cash in and you walk in with that.
And everything was done, all of your financial services were done through the bank, right? And I think that 10, 15 years ago, the idea of saying, okay, well, I'm going to let this, web-based company that I can't go and visit their office because they don't have branches all around the country, and I'm going to trust them with my money, right? That's quite a fundamental shift that I think we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years, and that's been what's enabled a lot of the fintech companies that have sprung up over that period to really be successful, right? Everything from taking a loan from fintech company, doing FX transactions through a fintech company, processing payments. All of these things are relatively new kind of concepts that I think have been enabled by that culture change.
I remember having a conversation with clients where I sort of said, look, there's PayPal, it's more well known. Your clients are more likely to pay you using PayPal because they've heard of it, as opposed to Stripe. Now, that's not a conversation that happens now. And with all the different fintech companies and with platforms, in the cloud where everybody's becoming more trusting and understanding of what's happening. It's also an understanding thing. It's also the trust, but also understanding that, oh, no, it's okay, I will get my money. It's just, it's just a matter of the different conformities that I've got to work with within these fintech companies.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting. So I just wanted to be a bit controversial here and ask you, with your global experience of working in so many different environments, what's the hardest regulation area in the world to try and wade through?
Yeah, I think it's a funny one because it's not what I would have expected. For us, what we found is the US has been the regulatory nightmare. That's the country that's got the hardest regulation.
But they're the ones who have got, the most. We are the most open. We're sort of capitalist driven, and everybody makes their own path.
No, absolutely, and actually, it's been like the polar opposite of the kind of, I guess, the expectations, right? Where, everyone's always talking about how Europe is like super highly regulated and it's a nightmare. Well, actually, Europe has got one single regulation that covers the entire European Union, right? And that's been super easy to navigate, and actually is part of what enabled us to get started in the first place.
Is that about to get a little bit harder?
Well, I mean...
Or do we just not know?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. It makes me too sad to think about the whole
just
Brexit
wait and
thing.
See.
But
I guess you're
the
like moving into a whole new country. You're just like, okay, well, let's pretend we're just moving into Zimbabwe, and it's going to be completely different. And we don't know what's going on.
I think that we're fortunate in that we're at a level of maturity and scale where we can kind of handle these kind of regulatory changes, right? Like, we're already handling regulatory changes across 30 different countries. So, whether we add one more regulator and, that's kind of quite manageable. But it's a shame from the perspective of new companies where, new companies that are just getting started, creating that complexity early on is a real big problem. And, I think that, well, let's see. Fingers crossed it won't come to that, but it will be a big shame if the whole kind of Brexit thing creates that kind of a barrier. But the problem in the US is that actually all of the financial regulation is done on a state-by-state level, and so it's not one regulator that you're dealing with across the US.
It's 52.
It's like 52 regulators. Yeah,
it's nuts.
It's frustrating.
So that's where the complexity comes from. I would have thought it was because it's so free and easy that everybody makes their own rules, so every single company you deal with is different, but it's actually more complex than that because you've also got the state regulations.
Exactly.
Plus state tax.
Yeah, well, I mean, all of those things. But,
Well, look, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining Small Biz Matters. It's been a really interesting insight for small businesses to see how a fintech company such as yours has successfully navigated regulations and also, I guess, perception of small businesses when it comes to payment terms. It's wonderful work what companies like yours are doing because you're really opening up the opportunities, and I think you've really nailed it with that. What was it, the problem you were trying to solve? And I love that the beginning of that was, people went to a restaurant and they just wanted to make sure that everyone got paid. It's just so organic the way it began.
Well, yeah, I mean, you start with the problems that you face and you experience yourself, right? And for me, when I was first starting the business, I was 24, so fresh out of university basically, and I hadn't got a huge amount of experience in business, so I hadn't actually realized just how big a problem it was in the early days. I was kind of going on the problems I'd seen when I was a student, basically. But yeah, it's fantastic to see how it's evolved and the ability to help all these businesses around the world to sleep better at night and get some time back to doing what they do best. That makes me feel really excited.
Well, thank you for sharing your journey of evolution. We're broadcasting Small Biz Matters here with Alexi Boyd at XeroCon in Brisbane, Vegas, 2019. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And we're going to hit the floor and start talking to a few of the other businesses, maybe some other fintechs around XeroCon as well. Thank you for listening. You've been talking to Small Biz Matters with Alexi Boyd, and we'll be back with some more messages after this.